Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's June 25th, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We have so very much to talk about tonight. We're going to get right into it. And it gets a little bit more spicy, as always, as we go throughout the evening. But towards the end of our roundup, we're going to have a guest on to speak a little bit to the concerns and the issues facing the disability community here in Alberta. Apparently, there might be some even good news. We'll see how that pans out, or I'm just setting everyone up for disappointment. There's no way to know for about 35 minutes. And then, of course, we're going to open it up to our Twitter Spaces audience. So if you're watching this online and you decide you want to hop on the Twitter Spaces, then we would absolutely love to hear from you and whether or not you think that we got everything right, everything wrong, a little bit of both. There's lots of choices to choose from on that particular survey. See, that was foreshadowing. We're using the classy literary stuffs tonight. But let's get right into the big events in Alberta politics for this week. And we got to start with the press conference that we saw from Danielle Smith, one of the UCP campaign promises that they made, which may or may not have been great or just certainly blows almost $1 billion size hole in provincial revenues, has to do with the suspension of the fuel tax. So for anybody who's not familiar, it's been about 6 months since they announced it, and it was actually a Mr. Kenny who announced it originally. The idea was that they were going to put in a suspension of the fuel tax. So the tax that the provincial government collected off of every liter of gasoline or fuel that's sold in the province, they were going to say, you know what, we're going to let that go. You guys go ahead and keep it. It's cool. Well, Danielle Smith had a press conference announcing she was going to be maintaining the program at least until the end of the year. Now, there were a few caveats going on there in regards to, well, it'll depend on revenues and it'll depend on inflation, and we'll see how things work out. But as always, the most interesting part of a Danielle Smith press conference is rarely the announcement. It's usually the conversations that happen after the fact. It's usually when the reporters start to get to ask their questions. And there's two questions in particular that we wanted to spend a little bit of time on tonight. The first one has to do with, we talked about this on last week's live episode, it has to do with the appearance of Take Back Alberta leader David Parker at a protest that occurred in Calgary, which was ostensibly organized by a group called YYC Muslims, who are protesting against what they perceive to be overreach of Pride into the school curriculum and also Pride Month. I feel like, I mean, it's a broad sort of collection of what their grievances are. Some of them maybe less founded in reality, potentially. And it's also super important to highlight that YYC Muslims does not, by any stretch of imagination, represent the entire Muslim community. Hopefully, we're going to be doing an episode shortly where we're going to really kind of highlight that. But nonetheless, Mr. Parker went there and he talked about how everybody's anti-human except for him and the people like him. The trans folks, the LGBTQ2S plus folks, those are anti-human people who want, I guess, not human, despite that's what they are. It gets really complicated and hard to follow. Anyways, he was a keynote speaker at this event, and there was a lot of hateful rhetoric that was used at this event. Important to remember, Danielle Smith, she's kind of tight with David Parker, kind of attended his wedding. David Parker and Take Back Alberta take credit for Danielle Smith being premier, and they take credit for getting rid of Jason Kenney. Question came up. How did Danielle Smith react?
Premier, again off topic. Last Friday night there was an anti-LGBTQ protest in Calgary where there were about 400 people attending, and the keynote speaker was David Parker. Just wondering if you had any comments on him speaking to such an event.
You'll have to talk to him about that.
Because leadership. So it's Pride Month. And the guy that, he went and said some things at this somewhat polarizing rally. Got any thoughts? Yeah, you'll have to talk to him. And no way did Danielle Smith decide that she was going to try to show any kind of leadership towards maybe putting a bit of a damper on some of the rhetoric used. No. She's just going to defer, which is kind of one of her trademark moves. We're going to see that over and over again through the show tonight. She kind of has a way of saying, I don't really want to answer that question, so I'm going to either say that another person has to answer it, or I'm just going to use other combination of words because reasons, I guess. But she was also asked about another little bit of news that broke.
Here, Russell Brown has resigned from the Supreme Court. He was known as a strong supporter of individual rights and provincial rights. What concerns do you have about his departure? And are you worried about a lack of diversity of opinion on the Supreme Court going forward?
I'm very concerned that he stepped down and that we're losing a conservative voice on the Supreme Court. Also very concerned about the lack of balance that we have in the composition of the Supreme Court. Ontario gets a dedicated 3, Quebec gets a dedicated 3, and I think the West gets 2 and Atlantic Canada gets 1. So there's not even any real guarantee that we'll have an Alberta judge there. And we've got really important decisions coming before the Supreme Court. They're in the middle of deciding on Bill C-69, which we've called the No More Pipelines Bill. We're intervening on a case Dow Chemical is bringing forward on declaring plastics toxic. And there are so many issues that really affect our foundational provincial rights that I am very concerned about it. So all I can hope is that the federal government is mindful of that and make sure that they bring somebody in who has a similar perspective that the former justice has, so that we're able to make sure that we have a robust and balanced discussion when it comes to the Constitution and the division of powers.
Now, there's a lot to unpack there, and we got to put some context, maybe a little bit of history on what exactly is being talked about there. But before we do, it's kind of important to unpack a little bit about what Smith and the reporter, columnist, creative writer, maybe that would be the best term to use. David Staples was the one who threw that question out there, effectively undermining the objectivity of the Supreme Court of Canada by saying, hey, you know what? Are you worried that because these people aren't applying an ideological bent to their legal decisions, Alberta might be in trouble? Danielle Smith responding with, in effect, yeah, I am. I think judges should have ideological bents, which is a fascinating perspective to take, because at the end of the day, the Supreme Court is supposed to be the court that is the highest qualified, it's the highest court in the land, and they're the ones who are supposed to be interpreting the law. This isn't like the Supreme Court in the United States, where there is a very, very clear ideological bent. In Canada, the Supreme Court is supposed to be a dispassionate interpreter of the law. Danielle Smith seems to be saying, well, I don't really want that. I want somebody who will do the things that we like, which is in line with some comments that one of her cabinet ministers, Brian Jean, made a little while back, because Mr. Jean got himself into hot water during the leadership race when he was quite candid about the fact that he wanted to see more conservative governments appointing more conservative judges, because that's the only way that conservatives are going to get the results they want in the courts. Which, again, is a lot to unpack, because it seems to be a tacit admission that in and of itself, the conservative causes issues, I'm not sure what, they can't stand on their own merit. They need to have a biased judge to push them through, which is a fascinating position to take, particularly given that Mr. Jean used to be a practicing lawyer. But okay. But what's all this business with the judge? Let's unpack that for a second, because how was it exactly that a Supreme Court judge became unavailable, in effect? What makes a Supreme Court judge resign? Well, we got to go back a little bit in time in order to make some sense out of this. We got to go a couple months ago when, all the way back to the beginning of March, when High Court Justice Russell Brown got into, allegedly, I'm going to say this whole next bit is, we're just going to stick the whole thing under the allegedly umbrella. So please don't sue us, is all I'm saying. But allegedly, what happened is there was a resort in Arizona. Justice Brown was down, the former Justice Brown was down there giving a bit of a speech. And at this resort, he found his way to a table of other people at the resort, and an altercation ensued. Now, where it gets complicated is the former Supreme Court justice. Apparently, he was described by multiple people as being really, really pushy and really, really creepy, especially towards some of the women in that group that he wasn't affiliated with prior to that night. And when everybody was like, all right, we're done, we're going back to the room, he was like, hey, I'll come with you, allegedly. And one of the gentlemen who was part of the group said, who apparently is an ex Marine, said, yeah, that's not going to work out. You're going to leave now. There might have been some disagreement as to whether or not Justice Brown was going to leave. So the Marine allegedly fed him a few punches, and that was the end of that. Now, there was a bit of a police investigation that came out of that, and the police investigation, the police officer who responded was like, yeah, it seems like it was an appropriate amount of force that was being used. There were a couple of women who corroborated the Marine's story. This has been going on for quite some time. Well, it came out that, yeah, so the justice resigned. He resigned because of the altercation. Apparently, he didn't want to see the full investigation go through. He had previously recused himself from overseeing cases back in March. That made a bunch of people go, "Oh no!" But our 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 biased rulings won't land the way that we want them to. It's such a bizarre position to take. But that's what happened with the judge. So now there's this Supreme Court spot that's open, and it's going to need a new Supreme Court judge. Where that judge is coming from, what they're going to look like, nobody knows. But that's what the question was about. That was what Danielle Smith was talking about. I guess we'll see what happens with the judge situation. But that's the context. Moving on from there, we got to talk about, again, we bring ourselves back to the dish pit. Because one of the big stories that consumed a lot of media time this week had to do with the continuing story of the Danielle Smith tweet / endorsement / advertisement / oh, by the way, the restaurants for sale gate. Apparently that's how scandals work. You just add gate to the end. But one of the things that happened, for anybody who hasn't been paying attention, is a little while ago, Danielle Smith tweeted out this thing where she was like, "Hey, did you know? Fun fact, my husband and I own this restaurant, and we had somebody, the dishwasher broke, so I had to go in and wash some dishes because I'm down home, I'm folksy." The next day, national media picked up the story like, did you know Danielle Smith owns this restaurant? She's so down to earth. Let's talk about the restaurant for a bunch of column inches. And then the next day it came out that the restaurant was actually for sale. There were a lot of people who said, oh, that's not good. Because here we have the Premier of Alberta tweeting from what is ostensibly her Premier of Alberta Twitter account, plugging a restaurant that she, by her own words, owns with her husband, and then they put it up for sale. Now, there's a lot of people who raised a lot of concerns about this because, first of all, hey, if I was somebody who really wanted to score points or maybe donate a lot of money without actually having to donate it, great way to do that might be to drop $325,000 into the Premier's restaurant that's now for sale. There were a lot of people who raised the concern that because Danielle Smith had pumped the tires of her restaurant that, by her own words, she owns with her husband, that, well, maybe that's going to inflate the price a little bit. Maybe she's going to get a little bit more money for it. Real estate market, Alberta, pretty hot right now. And some people raised some concerns about it. One of them was a former MLA, Cam Westhead, wrote to the ethics commissioner and said, hey, I'm not really sure how this is cool. Maybe if you could please do an investigation. To which the ethics commissioner replied, as reported in albertapolitics.ca, thank you for your email. You should be aware that the Premier does not own the restaurant. Her husband does. Your complaint is not within our jurisdiction. Both Sections 2 and 3 of the Conflict of Interest Act require that a member uses their office to influence a government decision that furthers their private interest. The sections are extremely narrow in scope. There is nothing to prevent a member from touting a business. So the argument that the ethics commissioner seems to be making, and we've talked about this before, the ethics commissioner is confined by an extremely tight. It's the ethics commissioner isn't there to say, I think this is ethical. The ethics commissioner is there to interpret the Conflict of Interest Act, period, end of sentence. If it's inside the act, if somebody does something that breaches that act, then she can go, yeah, we should probably do an investigation and go after this. With the whole situation with Daniel Smith and Artur Pawlowski, for example, because Danielle Smith said to Tyler Shandro, I want this whole situation to go away, that meant that she had a personal interest. And she was also trying to use her role as premier to influence the outcome of that court case, which is one of the reasons why the ethics commissioner came down as hard as she did and did the investigation that she did. But unless you can demonstrate that there appears to be the usage of government office to influence a government move for personal gain, the ethics commissioner can't institute an investigation. So regardless of whether or not the argument that the ethics commissioner seems to be using is regardless of who owns the restaurant, it doesn't really matter, because unless they're using government resources to help somebody else, it's all fair game. Which is really weird, because the ethics commissioner makes such a point that it's not Danielle Smith who owns the restaurant, it's her husband. But that goes against a whole lot of established history. First of all, in the tweet, Danielle Smith says, did you know my husband and I own this restaurant? Not my husband owns the restaurant. Lots of people on the social media have been very quick to point out that if they were to get a divorce, Danielle Smith would get a chunk of the proceeds from that restaurant at the very least. But we don't even have to go that far into the abstract, because up until, I think it was yesterday, this is the government bio that was posted on the Government of Alberta website. Danielle Smith holds degrees in both economics and English from University of Calgary. She's married to David and proud stepmom to his son. Premier Smith and her husband own and operate a restaurant. They live in High River with their 2 dogs. So we don't even have to go anywhere other than the literal Government of Alberta website to see the claims that Danielle Smith owns the restaurant. She has a financial interest in the restaurant. But that's not the only place that appears in a bio, because Danielle Smith is scheduled to speak at a Chamber of Commerce event on June 29th. And even there, it seems like they just copy pasted the last paragraph of the bio, but even there it says quite clearly, Danielle Smith holds degrees in both economics and English from the University of Calgary. She's married to David and proud stepmom to his son. Premier Smith and her husband own and operate a restaurant. So there's lots of places where you can look to and you can go, hey, the Government of Alberta website says Danielle Smith owns a restaurant. The bio that was presumably sent to the Chamber of Commerce to use says she owns the restaurant. And again, Danielle Smith says she owns the restaurant. So, there's that. But that's still just the beginning of all of the events of the week, because there's another thing that happened in regards to the Danielle Smith saga. In regards to the Artur Pawlowski situation, the ethics commissioner is very clear. Yeah, Danielle Smith totally tried to interfere in the administration of justice. She's dangerous to the democratic foundations of all of the institutions. And I feel like maybe all new MLAs and premiers should do like a refresher course in governance and laws and stuff. I'm paraphrasing the ruling a little bit there, but that's the gist of it. The ethics commissioner didn't really pull any punches when it came to just how egregious what Danielle Smith did. But there were also allegations that Danielle Smith, doing what she did, may have broken the law a little bit. And this is where the NDP decided to weigh in, because the NDP wrote to the new Justice Minister, Mickey Amory, saying, hey, sure would be great if you appointed an independent investigator to make sure whether or not Danielle Smith broke any laws. That would be fantastic. Could you maybe do that, please? Because we feel like some laws might be broken. And, the ethics commissioner, she said some laws might have been broken. So maybe if we could have an independent investigator, that would be fantastic. Mickey Amory came back with a fascinating response. This matter has been investigated by the ethics commissioner. She has released a report indicating the NDP, including Mr. Sabir, lied to Albertans for months regarding their accusations of contact with Crown prosecutors. The report also provided recommendations that the Premier is implementing. The matter is closed. Now, this is, of course, the new Justice Minister that was just appointed, but there's some problems. There's some questions about his statement. To start with, the ethics commissioner did not at any point in that report say, the NDP, liars, liars, pants on fires. At no point did she say that. What the ethics commissioner said was that in the course of her investigation into the whole Danielle Smith, Artur Pawlowski thing, she did not come across any evidence that definitively showed that Danielle Smith or someone from her office had been in contact with Crown prosecutors. She didn't say it didn't happen, and she certainly didn't say that the NDP and everybody else are just a bunch of dirty liars. That's simply not what the report said. But here we have the newly minted Justice Minister, who was appointed by, we all know who, Danielle Smith, who's saying, not only, you know what, I feel like the matter's closed, but he's using the situation as an opportunity to throw partisan shots and say, as one lawyer to another lawyer, because Mickey Amory's a lawyer and Irfan Sabir is a lawyer. He's saying that lawyer lied, which gets into some really fascinating territory because, as a lot of people have pointed out, he's actually lying himself about another lawyer and that lawyer's public conduct, and that potentially puts it in the realm of the Law Society. So there's room for a complaint to the Law Society about Mickey Amory, the newly appointed Justice Minister, lying about another lawyer. And it would just be so great if the province of Alberta could maybe go 5 minutes without having a Justice Minister who's got complaints against them by the Law Society, from the Law Society. Could we do that? Maybe just go a little bit of time without having a Justice Minister whose own regulatory body is being forced to investigate him because of complaints that have been made about their professional conduct. Could we do that for 5 minutes, given that it's the highest legal office in the land? Could we maybe give that a try? It doesn't feel like I'm asking for too much, but I know I'm asking for too much. But it goes on from there, because of course it does. That's how these things work. After Irfan Sabir and the NDP said, hey, we'd really like this investigation, and Mickey Amory said, nope. What did the NDP do? Well, they filed a complaint to the RCMP, saying to the RCMP, hey, maybe you guys want to take a look at all of this illegal stuff that's going on in the Premier's office, allegedly, and not so allegedly because the ethics commissioner issued her ruling. Could we maybe, you guys want to take a look? Maybe. They issued a whole statement, 4 pages, that was released publicly, where they talked about all of their reasons for concern. And there's a couple in here that are worth highlighting. In her investigation, Commissioner Trussler found that the Attorney General, Chandra's recollection of the phone call was clearer and more precise than the Premier's. Well, the Premier does have that bad habit of speaking imprecisely. She specifically noted that Chandra contradicted the claim made by Smith that she asked if it was okay for her to call Tyler Shando, and he agreed that it was okay. Tyler Shando's recollection was that Premier Smith never asked him this, and he viewed any such conversation between a premier and attorney general as inappropriate. The commissioner reviewed available information at length and concluded that it was extremely unlikely that Smith did not know that such contact with the attorney general was not acceptable, given the numerous warnings and briefings she was given in addition to her own demonstrated knowledge. The examples of information cited by the commissioner include, and then there's a list of, Smith talked about SNC Lavalin, there were PowerPoint briefings, all of these other things that were going on. It's just the song that never ends. But of course, this weekend, we saw the return of your province, your premier, hour of political power. And of course, this came up. What did Danielle Smith have to say when the question was asked? Words.
If I could have your response to the NDP's call for an RCMP investigation.
Well, look, it came up during the election, and people made their decision in the election. We got a majority government. I've taken responsibility, and we're going to move on from that.
So whatever happens, happens.
Look, I don't control who does the. Sorry, Wayne. I'm getting some feedback in my ear. I don't know if you can do anything about that on your end. I'll try not to make it too distracting, but just want your producer to know we're having troubles with the way our technology is working today. Look, I don't control how investigations are done. I do know that my justice minister is going to be giving me some direction and guidance on how I can interact with him on important legal matters in the public interest. I think one of the things the opposition forgets is that the justice minister is also my legal advisor. They are the top lawyer for government. Part of their job is to give legal advice to cabinet, and I need to figure out the proper way to do that, and I'll take his guidance on that.
So there's so much to unpack in that clip. First of all, Danielle Smith starts with, hey, you know what? They voted for me, warts and all, so I just get to get away with it. I took responsibility, kind of. So, golden ticket. And that's, there's a certain amount of arrogance, and some might argue continued disrespect towards those democratic norms that's on full display there. But what's really fascinating about that clip is Danielle Smith saying, hey, you know what? I still got to figure out how to talk to my attorney general. I've been given all these PowerPoints and all these briefing notes, and there's been this gigantic scandal that's gone on about how to talk to the attorney general and the minister of justice and how that's appropriate. And I still haven't learned a goddamn thing. What do you even do with that? Like, it's so remarkable that she's comfortable there and saying these things without any sort of awareness of what she's actually saying. Like, that's the premier of Alberta literally saying, despite all of the briefings, despite the PowerPoints, despite the public schooling, despite the ethics commissioner's report, despite the fact that I had to apologize in the legislature, despite all of that, I still don't know the rules for what's appropriate and what's not. It's just another day in Alberta, folks. Moving on from there, though, there's some other spicy news regarding a couple of MLAs, not MLAs, that came out. We saw Tyler. Oops, that's the wrong clip. We saw Tyler Shandro give his concession to Diana Batten. Congratulated her on her win. The final vote count, I believe, was 24 votes, made the difference between Tyler Shandro returning to the legislature and the NDP picking up that seat. The NDP picked it up. Tyler Shandro is out of the game for now. We'll see what happens next. But that's the final official tally. There will be no more recounts. The judicial recount is done. The other not MLA, but kind of MLA that made the news this week was Jason Steffen, who missed the swearing in. And his reasons for missing the swearing in are they strain credibility just a little bit. A lot of people are asking, where's Jason Steffen at? How come he's not being sworn into the legislature? What's the deal there? And when you actually go to what his explanation was, after graduating from high school and working to save money, my oldest son was called to a 2-year mission for our church in Africa. This spring, my son got married. As our wedding present to our son and his beautiful bride, my wife and I agreed to pay for a trip back to Africa so he could share some of the wonderful places and people he served with us and his bride. We booked this trip months ago in early March, before the election in May, before any swearing-in date conflicts. Upon learning of a swearing-in date conflict in June, arrangements were made for me to be sworn in shortly upon my 2-week return in the first week of July. There's no impact on my responsibilities or my ability to serve. We've done nothing wrong. And then he goes after Christina Gray and their NDP petition contains many lies. Their misrepresentations and some of the media are disappointing. My wife and I and my son are going to finish our trip. Now, if we lived in a province where, I don't know, there weren't fixed election dates, maybe that argument might have some legs. If we lived in a province where the Premier of Alberta hadn't committed to holding election on a specific date months ago, maybe there's an argument to be made there. But also she did. So the argument that Mr. Steffen is making that, I had no idea that there was going to be this election. I certainly had no idea that I was going to win. And I didn't know there was going to be a swearing-in ceremony shortly after the election, even though I was part of an election just 4 years ago, and there was a swearing-in ceremony, and I've kind of done this ride once already. It's a fascinating argument to make. But it's also worth noting that when it comes to travel, Mr. Steffen has he's got some priorities. It's important to remember during the peak of COVID, when Albertans were being told, oh, don't you travel anywhere, guys. We know it's Christmas holidays, but you better not be traveling. When it came out, the press secretaries had, in fact, traveled to Hawaii, and multiple UCP MLAs had also engaged in some international travel. Jason Steffen was one of those folks. He went to Arizona. So it seems pretty clear that not much gets in the way of a planned vacation, whether it's a scheduled election or it's an unscheduled pandemic. He's gonna get the best out of his air miles no matter what. Now, before we move on to our next story, we got this one other little piece that we got to talk about, because it potentially, can't say for sure, but it potentially gets really relevant really quickly. And that has to do with the AHS administrator, John Cowell. Now, John Cowell is the administrator that Danielle Smith chose to hire to replace the AHS board that she fired. She campaigned heavily on the idea during her leadership race that she was going to get in there. She was going to fire that board that was so bad that broke AHS, and she's going to bring in an administrator. He's going to right the ship. And John Cowell was the guy that she chose. Now, Danielle Smith was very clear. She chose an administrator because she wanted to be able to directly reach into the organization that is AHS and affect change very quickly. She didn't make any bones about that. She wanted a conduit so that she could be directly involved in the decision-making process, even though AHS is supposed to be an arm's length government organization. It's not supposed to be an organization that the government gets to dictate the specifics of how they're going to do the things. The whole part, one of the big reasons why Danielle Smith brought in John Cowell was so that she could have that influence and be quick and move reactive and. She was very, very clear about that. She was also very, very clear at the time who it was that John Cowell was going to be responsible to.
Cowell will report directly to Minister Copping and to me. And I must say, Albertans have been waiting, and they cannot wait.
That's it. That's the chain of command right there. John Cowell, Minister of Health, Premier of Alberta, that's the ball game. Now, why is all of this so important to highlight? Well, it's fascinating that John Cowell got his contract extended just a couple of days ago because there were some other things that popped up over the last couple of weeks. We're talking about the memo. Some of you might remember a little while ago, we had a whole conversation, a whole thing, where we got sent a copy of what appeared to be, certainly to our eyes, an authentic memo that talked about the fact that Dr. Dina Henshaw had been hired with the Indigenous Wellness Corps as the new Indigenous Wellness Corps Public Health and Preventative Medicine lead. Now, say what you will about the whole Dr. Henshaw and the pandemic thing. Before she was the Chief Medical Officer of Health, she did a lot of work in Indigenous health. She's actually really qualified for that job. So all of the political stuff aside, she comes to the table with the experience and the medical knowledge to do that job. Now, this memo made the rounds, and it raised a lot of questions. We pointed out, you know what? We received information that corroborated the fact that her email account appeared to be active. We received information that confirmed from people who were affiliated with the Indigenous Wellness Corps that, yeah, this was actually a thing that had happened. And then AHS said this. AHS statement. AHS doesn't speak to personnel matters. We're going to speak to some personnel matters, though. They didn't say that part. AHS doesn't speak to personnel matters. Dr. Henshaw is not employed by AHS. AHS is reviewing the position and remains firmly committed to working with Indigenous communities and working to improve health outcomes for all communities and populations. So it seemed like AHS was saying, that's not a real thing. That never happened. That's just a fake. And there were a lot of people who very, very quickly jumped on the it's got to be fake bandwagon. There were a lot of people who took that oddly worded AHS statement and said, no, that's it. That's the ball game. Now, we were very clear at the time. We had handed off everything that we had to a few journalists and said, this is not our sandbox. We do acerbic commentary. We do satire. We play with puppets. We're not investigative journalists. We're not journalists at all. So we need the big kids to run with this. Well, turns out the big kids ran with it, and it was real. Now, how do we know that it's real? Because one of the authors, one of the people credited with that, the senior medical director for the Indigenous Wellness Corps, Dr. Esther Tailfeathers, spoke out. And she said, no, this actually did happen. This is a real thing. We did a whole hiring process. We wanted to make sure that we had the best possible person for the job. Dr. Henshaw was the best possible person for the job. We got all of the approvals. It went all the way up to, allegedly, Dr. John Cowell, the chief administrator of AHS. He approved it. And then, all of a sudden, it got unapproved, which is very, 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 very interesting. Because we have to remember, who does Dr. John Cowell answer directly to? Well, according to Danielle Smith, as we just heard, it's her and the health minister. But at the time when this happened, there's some question as to whether or not the health minister was actually really involved in the game. Let's remember that the memo came out. It was released on June 1st, 2023. That puts it after the election. That means that copying was out. Danielle Smith was in the process of putting together her new cabinet. who's the new Minister of Health? Well, it's Adriana LaGrange, but she didn't get appointed until, gosh, a good chunk of time after June 1st, which then forces the question, did Danielle Smith have any knowledge of this job situation? Well, once again, your province, your premier, Danielle Smith, uses words.
Person has the qualifications and the approval of the AHS administrator and the community in which her work will be focused. Why withdraw the employment offer? Is it just simply a case of political optics?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask Dr. John Cowell about that. These are decisions that are made internally. I was briefed as it was unfolding. The approach that AHS takes is really an operational decision made by Dr. John Cowell.
So no influence or direction from your office specifically in this particular case?
Look, I was briefed after the news became public, and it's up to Dr. John Cowell to answer those questions.
So let's be really clear right there, because there have been a number of media outlets that have listened to that clip and gone, Danielle Smith denies that she has anything to do with it. That is absolutely not what she said there. First of all, in the same style of, oh, you better talk to David Parker about his transphobic comments, she goes, oh, you better talk to Dr. John Cowell to get the answer to these questions. I was totally made aware of the situation. But at no point, when she was asked, hey, did you have anything to do with this decision, does she say, I absolutely did not? And just to be super, super clear, just to put a really fine point on it, we're going to play that clip again. And if anybody can hear where she says, I did not influence this decision in any way, shape, or form, we will be, I will eat my little, oh, come the wolf's hat.
Person has the qualifications and the approval of the AHS administrator and the community in which her work will be focused. Why withdraw the employment offer? Is it just simply a case of political optics?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask Dr. John Cowell about that. These are decisions that are made internally. I was briefed as it was unfolding. The approach that AHS takes is really an operational decision made by Dr. John Cowell.
So no influence or direction from your office specifically in this particular case?
Look, I was briefed after the news became public, and it's up to Dr. John Cowell to answer those questions.
You can always tell when Danielle Smith has a talking point. You can always tell when she's had a conversation with somebody before she's about to do something public, because she repeats the same words and phrases over and over and over again. Her phrasing to both of those questions was, you have to talk to Dr. John Cowell. I was briefed as the situation was unfolding. Any of these answers will have to come from Dr. John Cowell. Now, obviously, she has to say that, because if she is to publicly say, hey, you know what? I totally blocked Hinshaw. I told Cowell that if he didn't do what I wanted, he wasn't going to get his contract extended. She can't say that. We're not saying that's the case. But she certainly can't say that. It's certainly a wild coincidence that shortly after this decision gets made, when Danielle Smith said it was only going to take 90 days and then she was going to reconstitute the AHS board. It's certainly fascinating that it's now turned into the better part of a year, and she still needs to have this chief administrator in place. Now, I'm not saying that we went and filed another FOIP. But we definitely went and filed another FOIP, which means in 4 to 6 months, probably, we will have a bunch of heavily redacted documents that we'll be able to put on the screen and say they didn't answer any questions. Because if there's one thing that we've learned from this particular government, it's that they aren't really fond of answering questions. Now, we got one little piece of housekeeping we got to deal with before we bring in Don Slater to talk about the state of the situation for the disabled community. And that has to do with the survey. This got a lot of attention this weekend. There were a lot of people who got justifiably really quite upset. And for anybody who's not familiar, we're talking about the Vote Compass survey. So, a little bit of background. What's Vote Compass? Well, Vote Compass is basically it's a joint venture between three organizations. There's this Vox Pop Labs, and they've modeled what they do after something that occurred in Europe, where basically what the idea is you answer a survey. You answer a series of questions in the run up to an election, and you say, this is what I believe, this is what I feel about these issues. And then they compare that to what political scientists have interpreted the various political parties stand for, as well as what the political parties have said they stand for. And it's important to note that the political parties do get brought into the process, and they do get to say, this is how we'd like to be presented, please, to some degree. And then it spits out a result and it says, based on the information that we use, this is who you most closely align with. They're very clear. They don't vote for you. They're not telling that you have to vote for these people. This is a very high grade quality survey. It's kind of like those who should I marry? What sweater should I buy? Surveys that you see in magazines. It's just a much higher quality, and it has some scientific rigor behind it. Now, it's also done in partnership with the University of Calgary. Bunch of people this week, though, were quite surprised when they received a bit of a follow-up email. And that follow-up email included another survey for people to answer. And it's the questions in particular that got people pretty fired up. We're going to run through a few of those questions right now. So, for example, women should be cherished and protected by men. Most women fail to appreciate all that men do for them. And by the way, these, as you go through them, you rate whether you strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree. And then there's a don't know category. A good woman should be set on a pedestal by her man. Most women interpret innocent remarks or acts as being sexist. Many women have a quality of purity that few men possess. Women seek to gain power by getting control over men. So there's a very, very clear set of gender-based questions going on there that a lot of people reacted to what in the holy hell is this? But there were other questions as well. Sometimes the people need to use force to take back their democracies. If certain groups stayed in their place, we would have fewer problems. How many new immigrants should Alberta admit? Now, there's a lot of people. Our DMs were very, very busy this weekend because we heard from a lot of people saying, what in the hell is this? Why is this being set out by Vote Compass? This is 2023. This is not representative of my views. This is not representative of the Alberta that I want to see. A lot of people got really, really upset about it. And coming out of the election, there were a lot of people who are primed to fight. There are a lot of people who are primed to push back against some of these views that we are seeing displayed in public discourse. Going back to how we started the show, David Parker hanging out at City Hall protesting LGBTQ2S plus folks and Pride Month. But we also saw just this weekend, yesterday, there was another protest organized by the same people, and a large contingent of counter-protesters showed up to say, not on my watch, you don't. There's a lot of people who have had enough with the kind of viewpoints that are represented in this survey. And they were really, really concerned. If there was any sort of preamble that said, this is a survey for these reasons, this is the methodology, it was certainly something that the vast majority of people didn't read. Because the vast majority of people who used Vote Compass were trying to play a fun little game. Figure out, what party do I most align with? Where should I land? This is fun. They weren't expecting to get follow-up surveys, particularly not follow-up surveys with these kinds of questions. Well, we're going to try to share a little bit of context now because things got a little dramatic over the weekend with all of this. So, in particular, these sets of questions were apparently put out at the request of a U of C political science professor named Melanie Thomas. And she's very, very clear in her retweets of the stuff that we shared, that while people were upset, there's actually some academic rigor that's going on behind this. She's very clear in regards to the first set of questions, the gender one. I asked this set of questions be included because they're well established in the field as a nuanced measure of sexism. So what Dr. Thomas seems to be trying to say, and by no means am I trying to speak for her here, but what Dr. Thomas seems to be saying in regards to the gender-based questions is that this is a series of questions that have been used many, many times in surveys and questionnaires inside of the academic universe to determine, well, how much sexism is going on here and what kind of sexism is going on here. In regards to the should we be using violence in the democracy questions, Melanie Thomas says, again, with real good reasons for wanting these questions included, and cites again, another academic document, social dominance orientation, a personality variable predicting social and political attitudes. And this is a big red circle. Apparently something that has been used over 6,500 times or cited over 6,500 times. So, to be clear, it definitely appears that these types of questions can be used to determine where people sit in regards to questions of sexism, questions of gender bias, questions of potentially racism, potentially the use of violence in democracy. So there's that. There is, as much as many people found these surveys to be patently offensive, and given the climate coming out of an election with a premier and a caucus who have said some of the things that they've said, it's certainly understandable that people would be perhaps a little bit more offended with these sorts of questions, particularly when so many people got this survey and they weren't expecting it. It came as a big surprise. So it's not a question of should these questions be asked and should these questions be answered? Because as we've seen in other conversations that we've had on the show, there are some very real cultural issues that exist in Alberta. There's the Common Ground Initiative and their rather unfortunate ability to identify that, particularly for new Canadians, they do not view themselves as being what a typical Albertan looks or acts like. The difference is those surveys and the work that Common Ground did was conducted in focus groups, and it was conducted in settings where people were expecting to be exposed to some heavy questions. Now, I'm not criticizing one way or the other whether or not these surveys should have gone out, but it's unfortunate that there wasn't any kind of nuance that was provided in regards to how these surveys went out, when these surveys went out, all of that kind of stuff. We did invite Dr. Thomas to appear on the show. She declined. That's cool. Which is why we wanted to try to do our best to put a little bit of context on it ourselves. But that's the survey thing. So do with that what you will. All of that being said, somebody's been waiting very, very patiently to pop on here, and we're going to bring in one of my favorite people to chat with, and he says he's got some good news. So we'll see what he has to say. But it's my honor and privilege to welcome to the show Don Slater. Don, how are you doing, sir?
Oh, very well, thank you very much.
Fantastic. So you have good news for us, I'm told.
Yes, Bill C-22, an act to reduce poverty and to support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing the Canadian Disability Benefit and making consequential amendments to the Income Tax Act. Now, when you have to take 2 breaths in, the announcement of a bill, that's something. Anyway, Bill C-22 has now received royal assent. It has 1 year to have the regulation formed. And so in July 2024, disabled people in poverty of working age should start seeing some sort of financial top up that will bring them out of poverty. So that will certainly help all disabled people everywhere across the country. So that is the best news I think we've all had in a long, long time.
That's fantastic. And that I could be wrong. I'm not down on my nomenclature of the bills, but that sounds like it might be not a provincial initiative.
No, it's a federal initiative. The one thing that was holding up the bill was the fear of provincial clawbacks from private insurance industry and from the government. Minister Qualtrough, who is the federal minister, has said that she's had meaningful discussions with the ministers in each province, and they have assured her that they won't claw it back. Right now, that is the biggest fault with the bill, is that a private insurance company could use what's called offsets, which are basically clawbacks. So it's depending on the honor of the individual and provinces to do the right thing by the disabled community. So I'm hoping that the provincial government will immediately regulate the private insurance industry and say you can't touch this because it is in the province's jurisdiction to make laws. The big problem was that the federal government said, well, we can't tell the provinces and we can't tell private insurers that you can't touch this money because it's not in our jurisdiction, and there could be constitutional challenges to this. So that's why they left the clawback amendment out of the bill. The disabled community and all the senators in the House of Commons were like, God, we better get this done. So they said, fine, let's get it done without that clawback issue. So I am hoping that everybody is honorable and that we don't have to shame provincial powers or insurance companies for taking money away from people in poverty. It shouldn't be a bill that is created to increase the bottom line of insurance companies.
Have you seen? I mean, we have a new cabinet. We have a new Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any reaction? I mean, there's the last 59 minutes kind of speak to the last week in Alberta politics, and it's the
Mm-hmm.
higher profile stuff that tends to get more people's attention. Have you seen any indication from the provincial government here in Alberta? We're not going to be jerks about this.
A little bit, but I haven't personally yet been able to speak to Minister Nixon. I liked his brother. He seemed to be an honorable man. I think there can be good people in all parties, even if the party conducts itself in a manner that we don't particularly appreciate. So I think as far as the disabled community is concerned and the way that ministry is being run, even with Jason Nixon, that things are looking up. I have nothing to complain about yet, certainly. I think there are people that have a lot of fear of Jason Nixon because of prior acts or claimed prior acts. But I try to suggest that this is all due to the war between parties and the propaganda that goes back and forth. And I'll try not to judge the man until I get to meet him in person. We all have our foibles, and this does not say that he might not be great at his job, because his personal life and his ability to do his job could be two different things. And what we characterize as his personal life, I won't get into that. I'm trying to be noble and not mention anything.
You're doing a great. You are being way, as always. I like.
Yeah,
As soon
gracious.
as I asked the question, I was like, "Oh, Don's gonna say nice things now."
Yeah, I know. I won't judge the man until I get to meet him. Everybody's had trials and tribulations in their life and tough times that they've gone through, and they've made mistakes. And but as far as his job goes, I don't have any complaints. As far as the Conservatives go and the way they've treated Asia, I don't have any complaints. The thing that everybody has to keep in mind is that the UCP is made of two types of individuals, conservatives and libertarians, or neoliberals if you prefer.
You're again being far nicer than I would be.
Yeah. Well,
you go on.
It's funny when a person votes for a libertarian to serve their best interest, because the first thing a libertarian starts to do is take apart government so that it can't serve their best interests. So it's an odd voting choice, but that's just me. So anyway, I'd like to see Jason Nixon announce something, put something out there that there's no intention to claw back this benefit. That I'd like to see him to change the payment date back to a few days before the beginning of the month, but I've been after politicians for years about that. I'm only one person among many advocates, so I don't expect to have a personal hotline to the minister's office. I have heard a few statements from UCP staff that scare me, but that's not Mr. Nixon himself. So I'll just wait and see. But as far as it's going so far, it's all pretty good. And you have to consider who you are and where you are when you're talking about disability issues. Like Alberta is far better than everywhere else. I think the issues we have are created by the fear that's promoted during political campaigns. The grenades that are lobbed back and forth are unfortunately lobbed over the heads of the vulnerable. And right now, my biggest concern after Bill C-22 is now done, my biggest concern is for everybody else's affordable housing. I don't want to see young people or seniors or anybody else in our society have issues finding housing. And that's the one that scares me most right now for the vulnerable. Is that's the next big issue to tackle, and that's the next big issue for everyone. The powers that be, you don't want to use words like plutocracy, because then you start sounding like a conspiracy theorist. But those with money are taking advantage of a housing crisis, and they're really monopolizing the housing sector, and affordable housing is disappearing. So
We've certainly seen it, like in other jurisdictions in Canada, and Vancouver is a really easy example. Once people start to realize there's money to be made, then the houses just seem to go onto this infinite feedback loop of, and then we'll get more money. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who can't afford $1 million for a 1-bedroom bungalow. So yeah, the housing first piece, we've heard from so many people how that is the most important factor in addressing not all of, but so many of the issues that people are facing. Have you seen anything positive or anything that's got you particularly alarmed on that front?
Well, I'm very alarmed about housing and the financialization of housing, because we've been, as Albertans and Canadians, for so long, we've been fighting American interests around for-profit healthcare. And during that time, for-profit housing became the real issue that we have to be scared of. Like there's basic human rights, and you think of those: right to food, right to housing, and right to healthcare. And now it's the right to housing that's really become the huge concern during this time. Edmonton has just changed all its zoning laws. I hope that leads to a lot more affordable housing. But the rules and regulations have to be changed to prevent large corporations from buying up all affordable housing and rent-evicting people. And I'm sure everybody knows what rent-evicting is, but if somebody doesn't, that just means that you evict a person by renovating their suite and then bringing in somebody else that can pay more rent. You do that to an entire building, and suddenly the building is worth way more money, and you turn around and sell it and move on to the next building. So, as go I and the rest of the vulnerable community, as goes everybody else. The reason for treating the least among us well is because if you can't treat the most vulnerable well, then that pattern of treatment works its way up society, and it's like next it's the elderly people, and then it's the young people, and then all impoverished people. And as inequality grows, all of society falls apart. Crime increases, violent crime increases. So these are all bigger issues, of course. And I came on to speak about disability issues, so I shouldn't drift too far away from that. I did get a kick out of that survey you were talking about. I'm like, whoa, somebody's trying to get people mad. But,
It's
surveys like that are really funny because the first question it should be, are you a bigot? Oh, yeah, I'm a bigot. Let's fill this out. I think the questions are so transparent that nobody would answer them honestly. So that's weird that somebody would send that out at that particular time. But
to me, it's the timing of that thing that is why it provoked such a strong reaction.
yeah,
Like last weekend, we had that protest here in Calgary. There's protests going on across the country. There's counter protests rising up to meet them.
yeah,
So let's just drop this morals bomb into the middle of it and see what happens. Like and again, I take nothing away from the academic rigor behind it.
hmm
It's just there's a time and a place is all I'm saying.
yeah. Sometimes philosophical arguments aren't best laid out in surprise emails. So
I got I got two questions I want to throw your way before I let you off the hook
okay,
tonight, Don.
I think I
And I'll
cooked
open
my
it up.
brain in the sun tonight. So sorry
Well,
if
good.
I'm looking for words. I'm usually fairly good with words, but I'm finding myself searching for words tonight. So I
That's me on
apologize.
any given day.
Okay,
That's me. I not
not good words with now.
not good for it. No. All right. So here's my first question. You, sir, are an incredible advocate for the disability community, disabled community. See there, I'm doing it
Yeah.
too. Would you recommend anybody listening to this episode or watching this live or watching it after the fact? I don't know. Maybe send an email to scss.minister@gov.ab.ca to say, hey, please don't do clawbacks on this Bill C-22 stuff. Is that something that you would encourage people to do?
Well, any person is allowed to do whatever they like to do. My personal experience is that most emails to the minister are screened and then sent to AISH supervisors. And generally, people will get a call from the AISH supervisor saying, how can I help you? But I imagine if all the emails say the same thing, no clawbacks, then that could be effective. But the minister has to know by now that clawbacks is a huge issue. So he'd have to plead ignorance to say, I don't understand the clawbacks is a big issue.
Were you watching the earlier segment where we had Danielle Smith saying, I don't know about how
Yeah,
anything about how Henshaw lost her job?
yeah, it's really a shame. You may or may not know I ran in a recent political campaign.
I heard a little bit
Yeah,
about that.
I saw a lot of really good people and met a lot of really good people in that. But, sometimes good people are lost in political campaigns when there's a war between two colors of orange and blue. People are so afraid of voting for the party that's counter to their desires that they'll vote for any individual wearing their team color. And this is why we need to get rid of first past the post voting, so good individuals have a chance to represent their communities. But we get what we get, and we have to do the best we can with what we have. The disabled community, I've probably said it before, we're sort of Oliver Twist. We don't have a lot of power to go banging on the pot saying, give me more stew. It's always, please, sir, can I have some more? And we hope that the chef is an altruistic person and not somebody that'll whack you over the head with the ladle. But, every individual should advocate for themselves. It's hard for disabled people to do that because they're very fearful. Their income relies on the altruistic virtue of the government that's in power at that time. So we just have to do our best to represent ourselves well and show that we're all good people that are deserving of benefits that society should bless us with. Because if you're a person that is blinded, let me back up there and reset. If you don't know what your fate is going to be at any minute of any day, and tomorrow you might be laid low what would you accept for yourself? If you're making $120,000 a year and you're going to get run over by a truck, what would you accept for yourself as a disability benefit? And I think if every person says that to themselves, they would understand what a disabled person needs in Alberta to get by. So that's my one hope, is that every person has empathy and understands. I feel like I've really gone off the rails tonight. And anyway,
No,
it's
I don't think it's not.
yeah. So it's a hot day. Forgive me. It's hot in here. It doesn't look hot in here, but it's hot in here. So
I'll let you go with one more
sure.
question, just because it came up in our chat
Okay.
tonight, and so I do try to keep an eye on that
Okay.
somewhat as we go through the show. And when I have somebody else who's doing some talking,
Mhm.
that makes it a lot easier for me to keep track of things. So thanks for that. But you got a couple folks who are wondering, is that Mr. Bill you have in the background right
Oh.
now?
Oh no, Mr. Bill. Yes.
There you go.
Yes, it is indeed Mr. Bill.
You always have the most fascinating things on that little
Well,
shelf
I am
back there.
eclectic, right? Is that a word I can use? Yeah. I appreciate Mr. Bill and all that he went through in his life, and I sometimes feel like Mr. Bill. Hopefully, hopefully Brian or Jason Nixon isn't Sluggo. We'll soon find out. But
There we go.
yeah, I just wanted to mention a few things as last things, and then you can just give me the boot if you like.
Sure. It's all yours,
Just
sir.
recapping, the date change is really important to the disabled community. It would be an incredible goodwill gesture for many people that are frightened for their future because of past acts from the UCP, like when Kenny said removing the indexing won't be onerous. The UCP set themselves up as the guys in the black hats. So changing the date back would be a goodwill gesture and go a long way to making the disabled community feel much more secure. A company that announced that you won't claw back anything from C22. I can understand Alberta would have issues with other provinces getting more money because their disability benefits are much lower than ours, but that's something to be worked out in the future. And I want the disabled community to know that with indexing, ACE should be 1865 next year. I don't want people, I would prefer people stop panicking. While you may believe that UCP has black hats, they're not totally black at this point in time, and they haven't done anything that's indicating that they're going to do anything that's going to hurt us in the future. So stay positive, keep smiling, all that stuff. That's about it, Nate.
Awesome. Well, Don, thank you so much again. And here's my ask, and I will commit to doing this myself. I think that, I mean, the last thing that I want to see is people who are on AISH feeling intimidated or concerned because they're having their caseworkers reach out to them and say, "Hey, what do you need?" So I'm going to send me an email to, and I'll say the address again, sccs.minister@gov.ab.ca. And I think that anybody who enjoys the privilege of not being on ACE should probably go ahead and take I don't know 2 minutes to just say don't claw back based on C22, and there's your email. It's an easy thing everybody can do, and we do know that politicians do react to public pressure. So
Well, yes, and that's what would be wonderful. And I didn't mean to say that the disabled person should be afraid of repercussions, but I'm just saying that there is a tendency of the ministry to screen out emails and just say, well, this is something we've heard before. We'll just send this off to an ACE supervisor so he can be as helpful as possible.
well, I wouldn't be surprised if I get a bounce back because my email address is blocked, because I know my Twitter account certainly is by certain members of the government. But
Oh, well,
I'm
what
going to do my
can you
canvass,
do?
and I hope everybody
Yeah,
does.
what can you do? You're doing a good job, Nate. So if people block you, it's because you're doing good work.
Well, that's very kind, sir. Thank
There
you.
you go.
All right, Don, thank you so much for popping in tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right. That guy is one of my favorite people to have on the show. He's just so generous of spirit, let's say. He's just such a great person. That's all I'm going to say there. And yeah, I see from the chat note to put the email address in the show notes, and definitely will. I'll make a point of writing up a whole little blurb, if you will, and there will probably be, I don't know, a video segment that goes up with that email address too. It'll get suppressed by all of the social media things, but we'll absolutely do it. We're going to open it up to the Twitter Spaces now. We already have somebody who's in the queue. If you're somebody who wants to share some thoughts, then absolutely, please hop on the Twitter Spaces and would love to hear from you. We're going to start off the evening with somebody who's a good friend of the show. She's popped on more than a few times. Very, very excited to have you here tonight. Tammy, what's going on?
Oh, not too much. I have to say woohoo about the Bill C-22. As you know, I still am disabled, but I am no longer on AISH. Let's put it that way. It's always, well, you're not disabled anymore. No. Actually, I am still disabled. I just make too much money in my current job to qualify for AISH. That does not make me not disabled. And I am literally one stroke, one bad turn that turns me unable to do my job into being disabled back on AISH again, because I am still disabled. Like, I think that's the thing, is you get off AISH and you're not disabled. No, I am still disabled. I make too much money to be on AISH. So it's woohoo. I'm really happy for C-22. Dawn is very, very sweet, but I suppose I'm enough of a pessimist to think if the Alberta government can figure out how to screw the disabled folk to basically roll back the amount of money that they put into the pot, they will, because they've said they wouldn't before, and they did. The only reason they did a whole bunch of kickbacks and stuff from, I'm going to call her Darth Smith. Yeah, I'll go with Star Wars today.
Well,
with
Dawn
Darth
did have
Smith.
the Darth Vader in the background, so it works.
Yeah, exactly. That is because she said she wouldn't. I don't know that I don't trust that as soon as something goes wrong with their budget, that the disabled folks won't be the first people on the chopping block, because that's what the UCP does.
Well, it certainly seems like the only time that the disabled community gets a I got to choose my words so carefully because there's so many phrases that aren't appropriate here. They get what they deserve. It seems like the only times that they get that are in the run up to an election. We saw that in 2019. Immediately after the election, things were rolled back. We saw the indexing happen again in 2022 in the run up to 2023. So we're 4 years away from elections. So
yeah. My daughter just came in the background.
Oh, it's all good.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I agree. It's like I was on AISH, and I mean, I was on it for 2.5 years, and my daughter and I were making it just, and she couldn't go back, she couldn't go to school at the time, because there was no way that between what she'd get from student loans and what I was getting on AISH, that we'd be able to survive. When I got my job, the very first thing she did was to go to school, which is great, but it shouldn't have been up to me getting a job that could support us for her to have to go to be able to go to school, right?
Yeah.
And I can't, I know there are other people in the same situation, and I can't help. And it's not the AISH workers. I know there are some AISH workers that aren't good, but I had the most amazing AISH worker who was fighting and trying to get things for me. And he'd literally go up the ladder with it, and they'd say, no, we don't care that she's trying to get work. No. Right? I was trying to get for new clothing to go out to job interview. No. She can find money in what she gets. So I have absolutely, and what's his name?
Don?
I think this one is Horse Killer. I'm not sure.
Mr. Nixon.
Nixon.
alleged horse shooter.
Alleged? No. Actually, I know it's alleged. That's what everybody says, but I kind of belong to that horse. Before my strokes, I was part of that kind of horse community. That's something you.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just trying really, really hard to keep myself out of legal hot water
to get out of trouble.
days
Yeah,
because
got it.
I'm still in enough.
That. I can be nasty. I'm just a public person. I got it. Yeah. So as great as it is, I don't trust the Alberta government. And yeah, boo-hoo. It's always the thing of, well, Alberta gets more money, but when you look at the numbers, yes, Alberta gets more money, but we get it as a flat thing, whereas other jurisdictions, other provinces get more things, not as cash, but as supports. And it still doesn't add up, but it doesn't make it sound as great, like Alberta's got it great. When you actually look at some of the other supports that are given in some of the other jurisdictions, it actually evens out the thing a little bit, at least, or closer. I was looking at it at one point in time back when I was spending more time looking at things like that rather than doing my own job. But I will definitely be reaching out to the Alberta government, and they'll probably go, are you off of AISH yet? No, I'm not on AISH, but I care about the people who are.
Good stuff. And I hope everybody does. And I will make sure I put that email in the show notes. Anything else you want to throw into the mix there, Tammy?
The thing about that thing, the survey. The survey. Thank you for the right word. That thing was, I did it. A lot of it was, I was like, how do you even answer something? Like my eldest daughter happened to be here when I was doing it, and I'd read the things to her, and she's like, they aren't even giving you a clear choice. She's like, there's no way you can answer that isn't disgusting. Like literally, some of the stuff, it was either you're saying that women deserve what they get, or that men are evil. Like there was just no way to answer most of those questions without it being that says something more horrid about you than about the question being answered.
Yeah, I know a lot of people had that reaction. And again, it's one of those things where I think that given a slightly different time frame, I think that it would have landed a lot differently for a lot of people. I think we're still 3 weeks, I think it is 3.5 weeks off of the election. It's still so fresh for so many people. We're in the middle of Pride Week, and we're seeing absolutely horrifying behavior from people on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Pride Month.
The sad thing is that a lot of the horrifying behavior from people are from some of our government.
Yep.
And that's just okay. My daughter is really used to this, and don't take it seriously, but I don't know if you watch any Japanese animation, but there are times that I wish I had the Death Note.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds ominous.
It is ominous. I just look at them and I go, Death Note. And they're like, yeah, we don't, Mom, we don't. And it's a horrible thing to say, but it's literally saying that there are some people that there's only. I don't want to say it out loud.
No,
but
I don't think you need to. I totally understand the strong feelings. I got a little thing I'm going to do for our close tonight, and I definitely understand where those feelings come from. I just think that there's got to be ways to re-educate.
I would hope
people.
there would be, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Sometimes. Yeah, you have a good one. Have a great night, and let whoever else wants to chat now.
Sounds good. We got Lynn in, and then I think Lynn might be our only other speaker. And if that's the case, then I'll do my little closing rant, and we'll call it a night. If anybody else does want to tap in, though, please do. Lynn, what's going on tonight?
Hi, Nate.
Hi.
So it's been an interesting week in Fort McMurray.
It seems I know. You've got You've got this trustee up there who's got some views.
We do.
Yep.
So we have a problem with Elections Alberta.
Oh, this is new. I didn't know that.
Yes, because they've never been asked the question. The question is, how do you fire a trustee?
Ah, I see.
Yes. So there's a campaign going. I won't give any more details about how that process works. So at the meeting on Monday, I'm hearing, because I wasn't there, that there was 2 impassioned speeches, one from the YMM Pride person, and one from a well-known person in the community. If you've been here as long as I have, we all know who he is. And it was powerful to tears if you were on one side, and if you were on the side of the trustee where he had his church members there was no emotion at all. So there's a couple things going on. Number one, in order to be a Catholic school board trustee, you have to be a Catholic. We don't know that.
Oh. Well, I mean, we got sent some screen caps that we're saving for tomorrow, that have a Twitter account that appears to have been a let's go with discarded Twitter account potentially for this trustee, and there's some let's go with bold views that are expressed on that little dumpster fire.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I hope that gets resolved in a meaningful, I'll say, way, because for anybody who's not familiar, what we're talking about right now is there is a Catholic school board trustee who had some very strong, I think we even touched on this last week, some strong, hateful, I would say, comfortably views that he directed towards the LGBTQ2S plus community. With some, we did talk about this because it was the whole umbrella thing. And he's not doing a great job with the leadership, according to a lot of people.
Correct. That's very correct. And I mean, I don't want to say too much because I know more than I should, but the part that I found hilarious was that once the questions get answered, we'll get the answers to them. But this weekend was, a pride thing here. And the Conservative MP, Layla, is very good friends with one of the impassioned speakers. And I just wondered how her boss would feel about that. But I'm just going to leave it at that.
There you go. Well, it's something that we're going to be keeping an eye on. And like I said, tomorrow night we've got a thread that we're in the process of putting together that asks some questions about this account and some of the other social media comments that appear to be potentially attributable to this individual because it is certain. I mean, everybody's got the opportunity for growth. I really, really do believe that, and I really try to stick to it. But based on his comments over the last couple of weeks, I'm I think somebody would be safe in speculating that the growth hasn't necessarily happened.
Oh, no, there's no growth. If you were at the meeting, there was no growth.
That's not great.
No. Anyway, I'll let you know if I hear anything more on DMs.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Okay.
All right. Have a good rest of the weekend. I'm going to bring in Cassandra real quick, and then I think that clears the queue. Cassandra, what's going on tonight?
Not much. I just wanted to clarify some things about Bill C-22. So I had to go back recently and reread it to make sure I was understanding it. And this is my understanding. There is a clause. I remember when the amendment, because I watched all the hearings and stuff, and I remember when the amendment was put forward about putting the clawbacks in the framework legislation that is going to be the disability benefit. And it was no provincial clawbacks. The only one that they did take out that they didn't accept was the one about the clawbacks if you've got disability through a private insurance company. But I believe my understanding is the one with the about provincial clawbacks is still in there. So the intention of all of this is that provinces, it's not just about clawing back the provincial income benefits from disability, but the intention is that other supports won't be taken either. But the caveat to that is in the past, we've been told, because it still has to be negotiated with each province, but in the past, this UCP government has told us we're not going to touch AISH. And what they did was they didn't touch the amount, they de-indexed it.
Yeah.
And we're $135 a month short of what we would be had they not de-indexed it. So Danielle Smith she indexed it going forward, and there's $135 a month that we would have gotten had they not de-indexed it at all. And then, and so I'm losing my train of thought here. I don't know what's wrong with me tonight. But the other thing is they cut back a lot of disability supports that are provided by AISH. One of the things is there used to be kind of a general allowance that was around $4,000 or so. It was enough that you could buy like a power scooter, like a mobility scooter with it.
Okay.
And it was often used for that. And they reduced that to half, about around 50%, which is one example. And there's also prescriptions that they've changed the coverage of. There's prescriptions that I've gotten that they limit how much they will pay for, or they don't pay for them at all, but they used to pay for them. So there's a lot of nuances to the provincial disability that they can play with and try to say, well, we didn't do that, but they did it in a roundabout way, I guess, is the best way I can put it. So that I just wanted to clarify that, and I hope I was articulate.
I mean, I followed it, and I'm not that bright, so there's that.
Well, I would argue that. I think you're very bright.
You go saying stuff like that, you ruin my reputation. Anything else that you wanted to add in there, Cassandra?
No, I just wanted to clarify that because I've done a lot of work advocating. I even sent in a brief and to the committee. So I've spent a lot of time in this, and I just wanted to clarify that because there's been a lot of misinformation and confusion that has gone out there, and yeah, so I just wanted to take that opportunity to hopefully clarify some things so people aren't too scared.
Perfect. Well, that seems to be the theme of the show tonight is we're just clarifying and clarifying and making some sarcastic comments and then clarifying a little bit more. That clears out our speakers queue. I just wanted to say one little thing before I do the obligatory plug. in regards to the protests that we've been seeing across the province. We're going to try to have a couple conversations with a few folks over the next week, 2 weeks. From we're actually hoping to get in touch with one of the organizers from Fort McMurray to speak to not only the issues that are going up there, but some of the broader issues. We're also hoping to have a couple of conversations with a few members from the Muslim community, because one of the things that's gone on, and I'm really nervous about, is these protests that are happening. And it's important to highlight, they're not just happening in Calgary, they're happening across the country, where you have these groups who are presenting themselves as being representative of the Muslim faith, like it's some sort of monolith. And again, I know that I've said this so many times, you cannot talk about any demographic like it's a monolith. It is a disservice to do so, because there is a diversity that exists inside of every community. But nonetheless, these folks are presenting themselves as being the voice for Islam in Canada. And there's some really dangerous things that are going on with that, because there are some people who are looking at the Muslim community and they're going, see, they're all bigots, and that simply isn't true. There's a risk of real harm that's being done to relationships between communities here in Calgary and Alberta and in Canada, and we got to pump the brakes on that, because there are many, many, many people who fundamentally disagree with the views that these groups are espousing. I was present at one of the protests that occurred this weekend, and the one thing that I wanted to draw attention to a little bit is as much as these conversations are being framed as we got to protect the kids, there's something really insidious going on, because some of there's a lot of debate to be had as to whether or not it's appropriate to bring children to protests. And I saw kids on both sides of the protest, both on the YYC Muslim side and also on the counter protesters who are from the LGBTQ2S+ community. I'm not going to tell anyone whether or not you should bring kids to the process or to any given protest. Of course, there's risks involved, because of course there's always going to be idiots. I think if people are aware of those risks, it's really up to you. That being said, I did not see any malice from the few kids who were present on the counter protest side. It was scary to see the open malice, the meanness that has been infused into some of the kids from the other side. There was literal glee that some people were taking in not only having their kids try to provoke the counter protesters, the LGBTQ2S+ folks. There were people who were coaching their kids to be cruel. This isn't just a group of people that are looking for, they're trying to protect their kids. They're happy to use their kids as weapons. They do not represent the Muslim faith on whole. And it's really, really important to clarify that. But there's something really dangerous that's happening with the way that these people are indoctrinating these kids, because these kids were literally just looking to hurt the counter protesters. They were taking glee in provoking emotional reactions from the counter protesters. Adults, I don't have problems with adults. I have problems with adults being jerks, but I expect some of that from adults. But when you see kids who are deliberately going out of their way to try to hurt other people because of who they are, we've lost the plot in a big way. And it's really important to seeing that and knowing that there are people who are going to look at those kids and go, it's the Muslims. It's not. It's those Muslims. And I'm sure there would be many people who would argue that they aren't even representative of the Muslim faith. That's not my place to say. But I think it's really, really important. And I just really wanted to highlight that when we're talking about, um, there are really horrid Christians out there. There are really horrid, any faith. There will be people who will weaponize their faith and they will indoctrinate their kids, and people get hurt. And it's really, really sad. And we just have to do our best to recognize that there are other groups that are not like that. We got one other speaker that popped up as I was doing this rant, and it's probably going to be something horrible about the healthcare system, but it's always really, really important. So I'm going to leave my rant there. I'll come back for the obligatory Patreon plug after we've heard from one of our other regulars, Ziad. Ziad, what's going on tonight, man?
Thanks for having me on, Nate. I just joined a few minutes ago. I didn't really have anything scorching as far as any expose from the health.
Delightful. That's a rare treat.
Yeah, I've injured you so many times. I've popped on your show last couple of times that I thought, no, this time I think I'll give Nate a bit of a break. In fact, I have some humor, but at first I wanted to say, I'm a Muslim as well, and I'm careful when I speak with or about other Muslims because I myself am in a sect of Islam that isn't viewed as being fully Muslim, and that's one of the things that sometimes happens between Muslims is we go, well, you guys aren't the true Muslims, and you guys aren't the true Muslims. But the people that are espousing that kind of hate that I'm seeing, with the children stomping on the proud flags and screaming in a very indoctrinated way, boy is not supposed to be with girl, and girl is not supposed to be with girl. Yeah, that's very much an indoctrination of hate. And so I wouldn't really even ascribe it as, that's a different sect of Islam. That's just people being hateful, independent of their religion.
Thank you for saying that, sir.
I wanted to, so I was chatting with a friend and I said, oh, you know what? My friend Cliff, I went, Cliff, I should actually get on the breakdown. I think they're going to be winding up at 10 and I want to just talk. So Tyler Shandro's recount was done, and I guess it's somewhere between 20 and 30 votes was the final count in the judicial recount.
I heard 24. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just thinking over the last 4 years, as arrogant as he is and self-centered as he is, he's probably thinking about over the last 4 years, at least 24 people who told him, you know what, you're such a bleepity bleep bleep blap. When you come up for re-election, I'm going to make sure I vote you out. And I bet you his arrogant response back to them was, oh yeah, go ahead, just try. Just see if you can vote me out. And here we are. And I'm sure if he has insight and humility, he might be thinking about those 24 or 25 faces that told him, I'm going to vote you out, and going, I really shouldn't have pissed those people off. I should not have been arrogant to them.
It's true. Every vote does count. There's people who like to say my vote doesn't count. You put together 2 cartons of eggs, and this election goes a different way for Mr. Shandro.
Yeah. So I as you can tell from the pain in my voice, I feel terrible for him, and I hope those faces do not haunt him, and do not reform him into trying to being a better, more considerate person in his future.
I would love to see Mr. Shandro turn into a better, more considerate person, because I mean I don't know if it's going to happen, but
Nate, I'm Muslim. I can't smoke what you're smoking right now.
Fair enough. Ziad, I want to say, no, in all sincerity though, I really want to say thank you for speaking up on that tonight, not the Chandra bit, because one of the things that I was going through my head over and over and over and over and over again as I was watching these kids just be vicious. Like, there's really no other word for it. And it was heartbreaking to see, because as much as there were the kids who were vicious, I could also see there were a couple of kids who had obviously been brought to this thing by their parents, and they were on the side of the viciousness. And these poor kids were so scared. And I just wanted to be like, hey, it's okay. I couldn't. In the capacity that I was there, but it was just heartbreaking to see all of those kids being scared. And I've heard so many people say, let me come at that from a slightly different angle. I believe, and this is one of the reasons why I try to do the show in the way that I try to do the show, I believe that there is a certain degree of responsibility for people within their communities or who are perceived to be a part of their communities to say, no, that's not that. Um, and that's one of the reasons why I have no problems calling out middle-aged white dudes because, well, and I think that it's a really important part of that conversation. And so I just want to say that I respect the hell out of you being willing to come on and say, hey, those people that they're not they are the radicalized branch of it, and they're not representative because it carries so much more weight when someone like you says it than when the middle-aged white guy does.
And you know, I just want to remind the context that I say it in, right? Like, I'm not saying that there are some sects or practices of Islam that are correct and some that are
Oh, for sure.
incorrect. I'm saying that what they're doing is not Islam. And you know, I'm old enough and have learned enough that I know there are other Muslims who practice their faith quite differently from me, and they might not respect my way of doing it, but I respect their way of doing it. And you know, between within Muslims or between Muslims and Christians and Jews, you know, I see a lot more in common and much less reason for us to pick at the differences and then divide ourselves or hate each other. So whether it's within Islam or amongst religions, I see no reason for us to focus on the small differences and divide ourselves that way instead of so much what's in common. It's a little bit like our DNA, right? Like when you look at our DNA, the difference between a black person and a white person and an Arab person and a Jewish person is barely anything in terms of DNA, but we make such huge differences out of it.
Well, and
Yeah, but this thing with the children that are being programmed into saying these hateful things, that's the same kind of hatefulness that has women buried in the ground and stoned to death,
yep.
right? It's not Islam. It's just violence or hurt or somebody's their own upbringing, and they're having it carry forward into the next generation, right? They're just trying to carry a dysfunction down to the next generation to kind of keep themselves company. But it shouldn't be happening.
Well, the particularly craven thing about it to me, and this is what struck me about the protest, is they spent like the first half doing the we got to protect our kids from the curriculum, and it's like, could you tell me what in the curriculum is actually bugging you? Because like all the things you're saying, that's not in there, but whatever. Um, and then the last half of the protest, I guess, that was one of the key organizers ranting against Trudeau.
Hmm.
And so, like, at a certain point, I was like, oh, this is a bait and switch that you're doing here. And that just makes it worse. Like, what you were doing was really, really, really bad. But the fact that you're now like, and so also we should get Trudeau out of office, like, oh, now it's just politics, man. Now you're showing what this is actually about. And it's to me, it is one of the most craven approaches to any kind of public discourse, especially given, like, if you don't like Trudeau, I got beef with Trudeau. There's lots of things that Trudeau has done that I'm not a big fan of. But you know what I don't do? Weaponize my kids.
Yeah. You know, like you can appeal to emotion or you can appeal to intellect in general, right? Like, you know, there's nuance there. But the appeal to emotion is the one that hits you first. It gets you the most riled up first. And for the next few minutes or so, you are more manipulable with more appeals to emotion, more rage farming, more attempts to provoke you. And it takes you a while before you can calm down and then let your intellect and your reason and your logic come through. And so when I see these appeals to emotion, you know, the rage or the pseudo religious outrage, it bothers me because I'm always striving for the okay. So when do we calm down and think this through a little bit more rationally? And it's a little bit like a, you know, the dopamine button, or like if you're addicted to Twitter or addicted to Facebook or something, right? You're always going for that dopamine ping, ping, ping. So I see this happening. I'm going, when do we stop pinging these people's brains with emotional overload and let them get a chance to sort of calm things down and think things through rationally? I'm worried about this overload of anger, overload of outrage, and this attempt to tie every form of outrage to something even more important to us, like our health, right? Like, oh, it's your health and a vaccine and mask, and it's your health, or oh, it's your religion and it's the church, and the church is being closed for pandemic, and oh, it's your Muslim faith and this, and there's this constant effort to try and find the things that are most sacred to us and then tie them to an emotional response as opposed to a rational response. And yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, there were two instances. One of them's been talked about a little bit on the Twitter machine by some of the anti-hate groups. There was a person who appeared on the anti-LGBTQ2S plus side, I'll say, who is a and I do not use this term hyperbolically, to be clear. And this is something I've called people out on the show before. Let's not use these words unless they literally mean what they literally mean. This dude's a literal Nazi. Like, and that's not me being like, oh, he's racist. No, he's a literal Nazi. No question. Like this is established. He's all the way down that white supremacist Nazi rabbit hole, and he was standing on the side of the anti-LGBTQ2S plus protesters, and nobody was like, "Wait, who's this dude?" There was,
Yeah.
like when you're on the same side as a literal Nazi, it might be time to check things and think about where we are. There's another guy who was there who was wearing a tank top, and the tank top said "Speak English or die." Want to guess what side he was on and accepted on? Like,
Yeah.
man, when you're that far down the hate rabbit hole, it's time to come up for some air. Is all I
I'm,
got.
guess, I'm guessing he didn't buy that tank top in Quebec.
I feel like no, or I would just throw it out there, Syria or Lebanon or any other country other than Canada or the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. But again, I really can't stress enough how much I appreciate you coming on and saying that, man.
Oh, my pleasure. I didn't realize that I have that kind of value, but then, I always underestimate my tremendous value to our society.
You do. You do. And I mean, I know that you're saying that from a place of self-satire, but your voice is an incredibly important one, man. Why do you think I stopped my rent to
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're here every Sunday, Nate. Your own service to our society,
Oh, now see again, all
and
these
for offering this forum is invaluable. I'm so happy I got to join you and that you brought me on. Like seriously, you are providing a service to our society, and you are helping us through a bit of a shock that we've had as a result of a certain election result on May 29th. There's a humanity in you that is infectious, and I appreciate it.
I'm glad you're on the Twitter Spaces so you can't see how much I'm blushing right now. Don't go watch the video. That's very, very kind of you, man. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right.
You're welcome. I'll go on mute and let you do the roundup or let you talk to other guests. I appreciate the time.
I think we've cleared the room, and honestly, I am going to end it there regardless because you said some really important things. I will say, I don't. We're setting up some interview episodes for the coming weeks. I don't think we're going to have one this Wednesday. It's just too fast. So look for our next interview episode the following Wednesday. We do have some really interesting speakers that we're in the process of nailing everything down with. And once we have those, we'll be happy to announce those. We have now a sum total of 4 FOIP requests in with the government of Alberta. All of which I assume will receive heavily redacted responses. But sometimes we get a little bit of gem. Sometimes we get some surprises. That's how we got the stuff on the masks with former education minister and now current health minister, Adriana LaGrange. And we're able to do that because of the support that we get from our Patreon sponsors. You got to know this is the plug now. So we're able to produce the kind of content that we do in no small part because of the support we get from our Patreon sponsors. If you value the kind of content that we try to produce here at The Breakdown, then you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you get access to all of our interview episodes early, and then we try to throw a couple of little extras in throughout the year as well, where we can. If you can't do that, that's cool too. Likes and shares, always big help. Smash that like button, that subscribe button, as the kids say. But yeah, if you can help us out at the patreon.com, that'd be great. We're looking forward to, when we get the results of all of those FOIP requests, we look forward to sharing them with everybody. We will be back next Sunday, 8 o'clock, for another one of these weekly roundups and the Twitter Spaces. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who was in the chat tonight. Always an active thing going on in the chat. Love to see it. I always learn something from it. I always read them at the end of the night. It's part of my little routine after the show. So thank you so much to everybody who's putting in the comments in there. Thank you to everybody who listened to the Twitter Spaces. Thank you to everybody who weighed in with their thoughts tonight. And that's pretty much it. Crazy times, folks. It's important to, as the ad was saying, take a sec, take a breath, get the rational brain back in gear where it's supposed to be, so that we can have these important conversations. So make sure that you're taking the time, and as always, keep the conversation going.